Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth ever episode of the Reiss Report. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by the New England Patriots ESPN reporter, Mike Reiss. Mike, it's great to have you on.
Matthew, great to be with you. Looking forward to talking football.
Absolutely, and you were the 10th interview I ever did on my other channel, and you're the first person who I've ever spoken with again on my podcast. So, I really appreciate you hopping back on. And today we're going to talk about the Commanders' additions of Dietrich Weiss Jr. and Jonathan Jones in free agency, who both came from the New England Patriots. And the first player I want to talk about is Dietrich Weiss. He's going into his ninth year in the league, doesn't necessarily have as much to prove as some of the younger guys on the squad, but something that really stood out to me is the fact that at mandatory OTAs, mandatory minicamps, he's been the last player off the practice field. What does that kind of say about his overall passion and drive for the game, despite, as I mentioned, being one of the older guys on this roster?
Matthew, that doesn't surprise me. Right,
Yeah.
right when you said that, the
Mhm.
vision in my head was the Patriots practice fields. They have these two practice fields
Mhm.
behind their stadium, and Dietrich Wise Jr. would always be in the far end from where
Mhm.
we stand, and he'd be
Yeah.
working on his technique.
Mhm.
So hand placement, hand movements, against the bag, against the goalpost. It was always like the finer things, and
Mhm.
I think that's part of his DNA. It's part of who he is. It's part of
Yeah.
why he's stuck in the league for as long as he has. You mentioned how long it's been. He was drafted in the fourth round out of Arkansas, and he had all the physical traits that you would look for. He's got the height, he's got the length, he's got plenty of
Mhm.
weight, depending on how you want to play him. The question was durability with him because he had some injury questions coming
Mhm.
out of Arkansas. And the fact that he has endured, sustained, it's for reasons like you're mentioning, seeing him as the last in the field, taking care of his body, being a mentor to other teammates. So that's the type of guy that the Commanders got when they signed Dietrich to the 1 year deal.
And you mentioned how he's, a mentor to some other teammates. Another thing I wanted to talk about, Weiss is a great player off or on the field. He's also a great person off the field. In 2024, he was nominated for the Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year award. How does his overall attitude as a person affect the atmosphere throughout the rest of the organization?
So if you meet him, Matthew,
Mhm.
he's got a big smile on his face.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it starts with like the demeanor of the person. There's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of presence. And so like I'll give you an example. Um, I would walk we now I had known him for 8 years since he had been
Mhm.
in the league. This wasn't something maybe he did as a rookie, but as
Yeah.
he got more comfortable in the locker room, um, you know how sometimes you might play a joke on a friend where you'd come up
Mhm.
behind him and maybe tap him on the side and then
Yeah.
go the other direction and hope that your friend is sort of looking behind him. You know, that's what Dietrich Wise would do. So
Mhm.
he's a got a sense of humor to him. He's got an empathy to him where he's going to be, reaching out to teammates, reaching out to others. How are you doing? What's happening? Tell you one story. I remember going to Dorchester, Massachusetts, in the city here in right in Boston,
Mhm.
and he was at a boys and girls club with his wife, and he had donated his time and money to help this boys and girls club with a program that
Mhm.
helped inner city kids learn the trades, which maybe they wouldn't be exposed to based on where they were growing up. And so it's things like that.
Mhm.
It's character of the football player, which we can talk about what he does in the field, but very invested here in New England off the field, especially in the later years of his time here.
And, you mentioned sometimes he would tease his teammates. He obviously has a great connection with them. What does that relationship look like between him and all the reporters covering the team?
So Dietrich was a captain 1 year, and
Mhm.
that made him a go-to guy. So
Yeah.
a lot of times, I think what I've learned, Matthew, on this stuff is players have different comfort level with the press.
Mhm,
I would say when Dietrich Wise came into the Patriots locker room initially, he did what they asked him to do, which is remind them that you have one of these and two of these.
mhm,
So use these twice as much as you use this,
mhm,
right? Listen more than you speak. But as he got more comfortable, elevated to a captain's role, you need people to step up in the locker room when the reporters are
mhm,
there and asking questions, especially in adverse situations. And I would say he was always a stand up guy in that regard,
mhm.
and tried to answer the questions, some of them not the easiest questions to answer, because you
Yep.
think about the Patriots over the last 5 seasons,
Mhm,
more losing seasons than winning seasons. So I think that was something that earned him a lot of respect
mhm,
from those with the Patriots. And another Patriots press corps. And another thing, Matthew, I would mention, we were talking about him off the field. They give out an award up here in New England called the Ron Burton Community
mhm.
MVP award, and he won it one year for his work off the field, what he did in the community, donating his time and his efforts and his money to making the community around New England a better place through the vehicle of the Patriots team.
And then kind of going back to his game, throughout 8 seasons in the league, he's never played under 14 games. As someone who's been following Weiss since the day he was drafted, how has he managed to be that reliable throughout his career? And is that something we can expect to translate in Washington?
So I think it's a great example of how what you are coming out of college into the NFL can not always transfer to the NFL because,
Mhm.
like I was saying, the injuries were that was like the big question a lot of teams had on
Yeah.
him coming out of the draft. I don't think he would have been slipped to the fourth round if there weren't those medical questions.
Mhm.
So to me, I do think it can transfer to Washington, and here's why. Knowing Coach Quinn, who I followed for a long time,
Mhm.
and the way he will approach things, my assumption, I don't know this for fact, would be that he's going to have a defined role for Dietrich Wise Jr. that likely will be, I don't want to call it a niche role, but probably not looking for him to play 100% of the defensive
Mhm.
snaps. He's going to find out what he does well. He's going to fit him into the scheme and say, let's do that. So to me, if it's 35% of the snaps, I mean, injuries can happen, Matthew, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
lock it down and say, of course, he's going to be able to play 14 games. I mean, freak things happen. But given the role that I would project for him, I see no reason why we shouldn't see that continue
Mhm.
this year in Washington.
And right now he actually is starting, at least when you look on the depth charts. Defensive end is one of Washington's biggest holes, if you want to call it that, or at least they don't have that much star power in that area. So we could see him getting a lot of starts this season. And he's been extremely consistent throughout his entire career. I think he's had 4.5 sacks in 5 out of his 8 seasons. That said, he's only had over 5 sacks in one of those 8 seasons. Considering that he'll be 31 at the start of the season, is there a chance we could see him achieve a career high in sacks or be a breakout guy, or is that ship most likely sailed at this
I,
point?
yeah, no, I think there's a chance. I think so much of
Mhm.
it to me will depend on how he's utilized.
Yeah.
Do they keep him out there? There were times in New England, Matthew, where he would just play on third down,
Yep.
just rush the passer. He's got these long, long arms,
Mhm.
right? And so when he gets his arms and gets his hands into the chest of offensive lineman, and he can really extend his arms, he can be tough to handle. So and I've seen him get hot. He'll have
Mhm.
run where he'll get a couple, and it seems like they just come in bunches. So
Yep.
nothing would surprise me. And I do think part of this, if we're talking about the way games are played, you got Jaden Daniels on the other side, team that was in the NFC title game. I know, we were talking before we came on about
Mhm.
expectations, but
Yep.
you think Washington's going to be leading some of these games in the fourth
Mhm.
quarter, and that
Mhm.
other teams are going to have to be passing to catch up. And to me, that would play into what we're talking about. If things are going like you hope they would for Washington,
Mhm.
that will put him in positions, Dietrich Wise, to rush the passer and produce some of those numbers.
Absolutely. And, the last question I want to ask about Weiss, he brings a lot of versatility to the Commanders' defensive line. He's played a majority of his career at defensive end, but if Washington does decide or need to utilize him at defensive tackle for parts of the season, is he able to thrive in that role as well?
So the thing I would say on that, Matthew, is on third down in pass rush situations, like I've reduced him inside to a
Mhm.
tackle role and have him get up the field.
Yep.
He can be hard for guards to handle because of his length. That's what I've seen.
Mhm.
I would say if you want to put him there on early downs and have him hold up against the run, against double team blocks, center guard combos, I don't think you'd be playing to his strengths. I think you probably want him a little further out at the end spot on early downs. So I'd say definitely could see him at tackle in passing situations, maybe a series or two if you need to get by. But ideally, I think the way he's best suited to be utilized would be more on the end when we're talking about playing against the run.
Now, getting into Jonathan Jones, the thing that's interesting is that both Jones and Weiss are really good in ways that's not just on the field. For Weiss, that might be what he does off the field, and I feel like for Jones, that's his work ethic. He was an undrafted free agent in 2016. He really had to work to get that opportunity with the Patriots, especially when you have Bill Belichick as the head coach. I'd say he kind of won over Bill Belichick, which is a really hard thing to do for a lot of players who play with New England. And, he wants to be the best player he can be, do everything he can to make an impact. That said, how is that determination and hard work kind of shown in his game, and what really stands out to you about his play style as a whole?
Oh, Matthew, one of my favorite stories, 2016, he's out of Auburn, can fly like
Yeah.
fast. So you're like, oh, wow, like this guy can really run, but went undrafted because of his size.
Mhm,
And so, because of that size, you're usually going to project him to a slot corner position.
mhm,
But initially, like, he wasn't going to make the team as a corner. So,
mhm,
how do you make it? And he just was a special teams maven that first year,
mhm.
covering punts, kickoffs, and he willed himself onto the roster. Like I
Yeah.
love that, right? Like just
Mhm,
doesn't matter you weren't drafted, but and just same thing we talked about with Dietrich Wise, just didn't say anything, just came to work, right?
mhm.
And so he endeared himself to Bill Belichick. So to me, that's like an example that I would tell to any kids. Like it's such a great way to go about your work, right? Like I wasn't the chosen one. I wasn't Emmanuel Forbes, just throwing a name out there, first round pick, right? Like
Mhm,
took the hard road. And I would say for him, that grew. So from special teams, then a niche role on defense, maybe in the dime package when they called on, third or fourth corner. And then it was the nickel package, and then he even started on the outside
mhm.
quite a bit, even though
Yeah.
he was, you'd say, undersized. And so
Mhm,
the role just kept growing. And then the leadership started coming with it. And so to me, like everything that came to Jonathan Jones playing wise, contract wise, like he earned it and he deserved it. And it's one of my favorite stories to talk about from covering the Patriots over the years.
mhm. And then Jones will most likely play in the slot this season for Washington. Washington's outside cornerback room is really crowded, but then you look at it in the sense that Marshawn Lattimore, there's always a chance of injuries with him. And then you have a lot of young guys on the outside. Maybe they want to put veteran presence in that role instead. Kind of like Dietrich Weiss at defensive tackle. Um, if Jones is needed to move to the outside, can he do that, and what area does he thrive the most in, especially considering that he might be, as you mentioned, a little undersized to be an outside corner?
So he'll give you everything he has on
Mhm,
the outside where frankly, you're going to have some concerns is mismatch with size receivers.
Mhm,
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as Jonathan's gotten up there in his career, he's always been able to run very well. I think as he's dealt with injuries that would have other players saying, you know what, I don't think I should play this week.
mhm,
This guy's so tough, he plays through it. But I think in doing that, sometimes it doesn't look as good, Matthew. You know what I mean? As
yeah,
you'd like it to look. And so I think that's the other concern, just to balance, when we're talking about balancing it out. You just hope that he
mhm,
can stay healthy as the years add on, and this is a physical game. He's going to take care of himself. He's going to do
mhm,
everything he can to be out in the field. You just hope that he can be at his best when he's out in the field. And I think sometimes those battles on the outside can take a lot out of you. When you're going up
mhm,
against tough receivers, and think about that division. You know,
yeah,
I mean, that's like we're talking
there's
about
a
some
lot
big
of them.
time, right? Like, let's go through it, Matthew. That's some big time stuff. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm thinking C.D. Lamb, George
AJ
Pickens,
Brown,
A.J. Brown,
mhm,
Malik Neighbors, right?
Devontae Smith. It's tough.
Right.
It's tough.
It's tough. And so he's great in the slot just from like a knowledge and savvy standpoint, like communication wise. He's seen it all.
Mhm.
And honestly, Matthew, like he can drop back and play safety too. So depending on what it looks like back there, it's very versatile.
And I talked about this earlier. Washington does have a fairly young secondary. Guys like Mike Sanderstill, Quan Martin, Trey Amos, their rookie cornerback. What kind of veteran leadership can we expect Jones to bring to the table in Washington? I think he's another 31-year-old, similar to Weiss.
Top level. I mean, top shelf leader.
Mhm,
Um, Again, similar to what we talked about with Dietrich
mhm,
Wise. I mean, this guy has won 2 Super Bowls. He's played
mhm,
in 3 of them, seen it at the highest level, been around Tom Brady
mhm.
for 4 seasons. Um, so I think,
Yeah.
and others, and so I
Mhm,
think if you're a young player, like that's exactly the type of person you would want to gravitate towards, um, to try to elevate yourself in your career. And I would imagine
mhm.
that's why Washington signed him. That's part of
Yeah.
his value, right? Like at this point in his career, um, he might not be at his peak in performance, but still a lower percentage is still good. And then you add the leadership, and that's a very valuable piece for a team that's looking to take that next step after a great season last year.
And kind of to go along with the leadership, both Wise and Jones have Super Bowl experience, which you touched on. How important is that, especially for a team with a lot of young guys coming off the NFC Championship game, a lot of pressure to replicate that same success, just having those older guys to be the leaders in that organization.
I think it's really important. I think you always want
Mhm,
to have a mix, right? Like you don't want to be too old and sort of it passes you by, right? And then teams are running by you, but you don't want to be too young where, yeah, you might make some progress, but then you get in these situations where adversity strikes because it's going to happen to every team in the league, and you maybe need some guidance on how to navigate your way through that. And so I think player like Jonathan Jones, Carrollton, Georgia, where he's from, just like really like down to earth,
yeah.
good family guy. Um, just like I feel really, really strongly. I actually bumped into Coach Quinn down at the owners' meetings in late March and told him, I said,
Yep.
if you were looking to add character to your locker room, like you got 2 of the best that we've
Mhm.
seen in New England in that regard. So I think you're right on with where you're going with that in terms of the experience and the knowledge and what it might be able to bring to that locker room.
And then the last thing I want to talk about, in terms of the contracts themselves, Wise got a 1 year, $3.25 million deal. Jones got a 1 year, $5.5 million deal. How would you evaluate these contracts for Washington from a financial aspect? And could you see either of these guys becoming steals in the future?
So, well, I think those are good. Those are good deals in the sense of, you know, one, they're modest to me
Yeah.
in terms of you're not breaking the bank. So from a team
Mhm.
standpoint, you're working easily within the cap, and they're players that should be on your 53-man roster playing significant roles. And when I say significant, they might start, or even nickel corner is a starter in a lot of ways, right? And so between Wise, whether it's a situational pass rusher or even just an early down defensive end, who's part of a rotation, like I think those deals are reflective of that
Mhm.
and are solid. And then if they show that they're performing at a high level, you can always extend it. If both sides are have a willingness to do that. So I thought the deals were fair. I thought they were fair for the players. I thought they were fair for the team. And I think on a 1 year term, it usually tells you, like, yeah, these are players toward the end of their careers, but like we still think they have something to offer.
Mhm. Yeah, I love to hear that. And, with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
I think I do, Matthew. I was going to say, first game of the preseason.
Yeah.
Let's go. Washington coming up to Foxborough, Massachusetts. We
Mhm.
have some joint practice on
Yeah.
August 6th. So we have Jaden Daniels on the practice field with Drake May. Like, that's going to be exciting, right? To see both those guys
Mhm.
come together. Um, Mike Vrabel, Dan Quinn. Super excited for that. And then we'll see how Washington approaches the preseason and whether they play guys or not. But I think it'll be a lot of fun to have those two teams
Mhm.
kicking off the preseason together, getting together.
Yeah, 100%. And what are you most looking for on the Patriots side of things in that joint practice?
So I was thinking about this. So they're going to
Mhm.
practice on Wednesday, August 6th.
Mhm.
They're going to play Friday, August 8th. And I was wondering if by practicing 2 days before the game, will they even be in full pads? you
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
and maybe they will be, and then they won't play a lot of guys on in the game, or
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm just curious how they're going to
Yeah.
ration
Yeah.
it out. Maybe it's more of a situational practice where they just get out and they're in shorts and t-shirts per se, and
Mhm.
they just work on, or maybe it's special teams. I'm curious, like what both coaches are thinking as to how they'll handle it. But I would say, to answer your question, so you can tell I get excited, Matthew, even though it's a long way away. I want to see how the Patriots' offensive line holds up. Like that to
Mhm.
me has been
Yeah.
their biggest question. In fact, some people up here in New England have pointed to Washington and said, look, this was an issue for them
Mhm.
2 seasons ago, and Adam Peters had some deft drafting and signings that helped solidify that a little bit more
Mhm.
maybe than was anticipated.
Yeah.
Was that accurate? Is that sort of a fair way to look at it from last year?
Yeah, 100%, definitely.
So yeah, that's what would you be looking forward to, and that if you were up here covering the joint practices from a Washington standpoint?
Funny enough, I think it'd be offensive line as well. Not necessarily. I think it's just because of the questions surrounding the offensive line. You bring in Tunsil, you draft Connerly, and then you have the Cosme injury, and a lot of it comes down to you want to get Brandon Coleman into that rotation going into his second year. Where does he fit in? We're still waiting to hear more about Cosme's injury. Dan Quinn has said a lot of positive things,
Yeah,
and just he's on the right trajectory, but we don't really know what that's looking like. So to see what they go out with, maybe Nick Allegretti gets some snaps in there as well. There's still a lot of questions surrounding that offensive line room.
super cool. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's awesome. And I'll probably be circling back with you as we get closer to
Yeah,
sharpen up my Washington knowledge before we get out there on the field.
yeah, absolutely. And if you're watching this and you made it up to this point, I really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to help out the channel. And as always, we will see you next time.